Why are there so many podcasts about Tottenham? Do I want to know why? They might contain insight, but mostly delusions. If I hear one more, I might die. They don't like Levy and they don't like Iain.
Hello and welcome back to Podden and Podspur, the Spurs podcast about Spurs podcasts. It's been a while. It's 2026. I haven't spoken to you personally, just you, since late December, just before Christmas. Spurs have been in a bit of a rut, as you've all seen, and it's just been difficult to motivate amongst the holidays and the new year, and then getting out of sync and just getting behind this microphone and talking about what's happening in N17. It's not pleasant, and I feel like I haven't been able to contribute to the discourse in a way that I feel like would be meaningful. Like, you can pick up any Spurs podcast at the moment, and aside from a few like fringe ideas, you're going to hear the same couple things coming out of people. So I don't really feel like I need to transform or comment on anything that's being said. So I've taken a bit of time off, and honestly, since I've started recording Podnam, something I've paid a lot more close attention to is just kind of the breakneck speed at which changes happen at Tottenham Hotspur. And I've said this before, but like ever since I started recording back in March, you know, we've won a Europa League, we've sacked a manager, we've had total overhaul at the club, we've, you know, finished 17th, we're slipping into close to being another relegation battle again. It's not been exactly, you know, calm seas or a boring ride in the time since I've been doing this. So it feels nice to take a bit of time off, especially, you know, you want to be around your holidays, you want to see your friends and family without thinking, God, I got to listen to 20 Spurs podcasts this week and try to summarize it or say something of relative and maybe not importance, but interest for people. So I've taken some time off, wait until the new year. Happy New Year, by the way. It's the 18th of January, so it's probably a little bit too late for that. You know, Larry David would probably kick my teeth in for for being so late into the year. So this podcast isn't going to necessarily be like the others I've recorded. It's not going to be a true commentary podcast. It's not going to be an interview pod. It's going to be a little bit more stream of consciousness. I have some notes, but it's going to be a little bit more about me. That's right. You know, sickos out there who have been waiting for the podcast about podcasts are getting it today. Because as a person who has been living and working in the scientific world since my late teens through internships and whatnot, something you always see at the start of a presentation, usually at a big conference, is a bias check, a summary of any conflicts of interest that the speaker might have, so you know that when they talk about a certain protein or drug, that they have a financial interest in, you know, promoting it in a certain way or not. So today I feel like at the, you know, almost a year since I started this pod, something I've never really done is outright stated my conflicts of interest. Like, where do I come from regards to Spurs? What's my view of things like the Tottenham way, my background, this podcast, and the blind spots that I know are present. And I've talked about these here and there, but I don't think I've ever really put them into one piece that synthesized all of my thoughts as best I can on this topic. I think it's important for you to criticize and critically evaluate. Probably means the same thing, but to you know, really think about the media you consume and the person behind the microphone beyond just the the words they speak. And I'm not talking about a, parasocial, find out their address and stand outside their window at 2 a.m., yelling at them for having the wrong opinion on Thomas Frank. But in terms of thinking back of the things you've heard from them, the stuff that you do know, the opinions they might share on social media or on TV, and how that fits into their narrative of their own life and of their own agenda as it's shared through their public persona. To think about, okay, how are they influencing me based upon what they are saying and what they've lived? And it doesn't mean that you have to disregard somebody or disregard their statements, but it's just, they are going to filter things and amplify things in their own way to fit how they see the world. Take, for example, the Change for Tottenham protest that happened before the West Ham game. One person might tell you it was 100 people that showed up. Someone else might look at it and say it was more like 250, and depending on where they come from, they might overplay or underplay that number, and therefore, inflate the importance of a movement or not. I know you know this, but I'm just padding out my time so I can get closer to an hour. That's my bias. And, as it relates back to this podcast, as it relates back to Poddenham or Poddingham, if you prefer, is that this podcast is a filter and a booster of opinion from the wider Spurs community. I may only have a small platform, but what I've set myself up as is a conduit to a wider range of opinions as shared through podcasts than maybe you would experience in your normal, podcast consumption throughout the week. And so therefore, the things that I say to you are filtered through my own experiences. Now, you know this again, but if I'm not truthful and not honest about my experiences, I don't feel like you can take trust from what I say. And it makes me, makes me want to be sort of on the up and up. This podcast is a way to vicariously experience voices and opinions you might disagree with. Some people might see it more as a biased and twisted representation of the views shared by ordinary fans. And that is something that I don't want to do, but I can accept that might be what somebody feels, that I, in a way, have set myself up as the judge, jury, and executioner in a very small way of the Spurs fandom, and that's really not what I want. When I started this, it was more about celebrating the diversity of opinions across the Spurs fan base, of trying to synthesize an overall narrative and a temperature check of where we're at any one point. And I agree with both viewpoints that somebody might have of this podcast, of a way to share opinions, but also a biased representation of those opinions. I am proud of the effort that I put into this pod, to share with the community, to listen to hours of Spurs content, make copious amounts of notes, think about a narrative, think about an interesting thing to layer on top of what's already happening, to boost smaller pods, and to engage with my maniacal, at times, love for Tottenham Hotspur in a more constructive way. I paint masterpieces with podcasts. You might use oil or oil paint or whatever. I'm here talking about somebody in their bathtub recording on an old phone, basically. Might cut that out. But I know I'm fallible. Lord knows I know I'm fallible. I've been wrestling with it for 40 years. And those are the flaws that I want to explore today. So I haven't really organized this in a good way, but I think that it's nice to take a step back and sort of look at me and how I fit into the Tottenham podcast community as a whole. What I see when I look at the Tottenham podcast, sphere, the podosphere, is a lot of people who are very regular match-going fans in some way, shape, or form. This makes sense. I've talked before about, the highest engagement with the club leads you to have a higher maybe need or obsession to get behind the microphone and do something with it. And so I didn't grow up in North London. You can probably tell from my accent. I grew up, closer to Oxford than anything else. Still close enough to be considered Spurs heartlands. You can grab one of the coaches that the club lays on from a place pretty near my hometown that will take you straight to the stadium. So they consider it part of their, catchment area. And I only lived and worked in London through undergrad and postgrad for less than a decade. So still a decent amount of time, but was still never a regular match-going fan. So I don't have that experience to draw from, that sort of steady knowledge over many, many years of what life in Tottenham is like, truly what the club means to the local area. I really enjoy hearing other people share it. And having been there, enough, and having lived in London and lived in similar areas, I can kind of transplant the stuff that's shared onto my own experiences to have some empathy for the importance of the club in the local area. But I've had to marinate in Spurs culture in a different way to gather my own range of experiences from a distance. Like, my family didn't go to games as a kid, so I don't have that. Like, my period of experience in the 90s was really what you'd read in the back pages of a newspaper, what you might see on Match of the Day, and kind of the stuff that would be shared through other things, like that just as I was hitting adolescence, soccer AM was becoming a thing. So that would be how you could pick up on things about clubs and supporter culture. So really not in itself like the best representation of anything, in my opinion, compared to the living and breathing your life on the shelf or something. So I've had to do it with my dad and my older brother, and really podcasts in my later years, like I'm geriatric, but like from my early 20s onwards, things like The Fighting Cock, etc., have really helped me develop a sense of what supporter fandom looks like, and me trying to figure out where I fit in with that. Going to games, I've been, a handful of times, really not enough. Like, when I lived in London, I was an undergrad, didn't have enough money to go to games. I probably should have put more money aside for it, and I regret that now. Usually went to Europa League games because they were the easiest to get tickets for, but always tried to make a conscious effort to go to one game a year if I could help it. Seen some wins, seen some losses, seen some draws, seen White Hart Lane under the lights, been to the new stadium, so that's all good. But again, it's not necessarily anywhere near the same as somebody who was there in the stands week in, week out. So that kind of puts me at a distance from that type of podcaster, where I can get into the headspace, but I can't truly fully understand where they're coming from with some of the support stuff, especially like the Change for Tottenham stuff. I feel like it's going to have a much greater impact and understanding for you if you are a regular match-going fan, or if you have come from a family of match-going fans for generations. I can see how that could personally mean more to you than it would to somebody like me. On the other hand, this kind of exposure to Spurs through the media since childhood, through family, through living in London, sets me apart from the sort of second group of podcasters who are the newer fans, those predominantly living overseas, predominantly in the US, who have come to Spurs later in life. And I think you can probably go back to my categorization of different types of Spurs podcasters to see where I'm coming from. But I also live abroad myself. I am at a supporters club every week with friends and some people who I've only just met who are Spurs fans and are diehards. But again, they come in and they integrate different sporting opinions from other sports, NFL, whatever, different experiences. So I'm similar to them too, but again, not quite, because wasn't born overseas, didn't come to it later in life. So I feel like a nice thing about this podcast and my experiences as a person puts me in a position to both be close enough to the two main groups of geographically separated Spurs fans, but also to understand them, but also far enough away to critique. Sort of in a limbo in some ways, so things can get misinterpreted, or don't fully get the context of where they're coming from. But yeah, so let's get the elephant out of the room. When I wrote this script, Spurs had just lost to Bournemouth. That has now changed. Spurs have now lost to West Ham as well. Did we play a game in between? Yeah, Villa. We lost to Villa too. And we're bad. Tottenham Hotspur are a bad team. We're a bad organisation. Even the kind of meta community of Tottenham Hotspur fans, podcasters, is bad. Everything feels very bad. The only thing which is good at the moment is the women's team are absolutely tearing it up, getting good support, have a good manager, have a group of really likable players. But the men's team, the place where I put the majority of my energy, are frustratingly awful. And the reason why I say this is the elephant in the room is because it's part of the reason why I've been unable to engage with recording a podcast, mentally. I've been waiting for the shoe to drop on Thomas Frank and for him to get sacked for weeks now, actually. I kept thinking if I record a podcast about how Spurs podcasters are talking about him, it would be out of date within days, because surely after poor performance and loss after loss, surely at some point, based upon our previous history of supporting this club, he can't be in situ for much longer. And I know that there's been a change of pace or a change of strategy with Daniel Levy leaving last year, but we've seen people and coaches at Spurs, coaches at other teams fired for far less than what's happening under Thomas Frank, both in terms of, like I say, performance, fan sentiment, communications, which I'll get onto, I hope, if I remember, and points on the table. It's strange. I'm old enough and ugly enough to remember Martin Jol getting sacked at halftime back when he was beloved. Pochettino, sacked after taking us to a Champions League final. And we've got a guy who has lost how many games? He's got the lowest home win percentage out of any Spurs coach in the Premier League era, I think. 18% or something. It's truly dreadful, and that's probably puts him at the lowest in all time too. It's truly dreadful. Spurs shouldn't be sitting in 14th, 15th, 16th over a consecutive period of time. It's the worst I can remember of being a Spurs fan. Even in the 90s, like I said, a period where admittedly I have, patchy memories, being both under 10 and under 15 for various parts of it. But even then, I remember there being a sort of sense of hope that there would be a player who could dig us out of trouble, picking up Klinsmann in January '98, having a player like, I don't know, Ginola or somebody around. Again, that's the same season, but that was the season we were 17th going into that game against Wimbledon. There was always a sense that maybe we could get out of it. We were slipping, we were getting really low. Had one bad season, but it was one bad season, and if you look at the results either side, we bounced back to 10th or even 6th, I think, 5th. Looking at the results yesterday on Wikipedia when we finished in the table, either side of Aussie's season and what's his name? The guy from Grasshoppers, Christian Gross. Either side of those seasons, there was league performances which were much more in line with what you might expect of Spurs of that era. But now we're looking at 2 years of league placements in the lower bottom half of the table, just finishing above relegation last year with important caveats, of course. But it's the longest period of time where I can feel like this Spurs team sucks. And I don't quite buy into what people are saying about the players being unlikable. I think there's actually the opposite. I think the players are actually quite likable in spite of everything that's happening, especially the younger kids. Or the younger men. The younger kids, that's not right. So I've been expecting Frank to go for a while and haven't really felt like recording a podcast would be particularly helpful until he was gone. and you could summarise and reflect back on his period of time as Spurs manager. But that hasn't happened yet. Maybe that will change within the 24 hours after recording this. And if it does, then I'm going to take personal responsibility for it, for having put this out and recorded it and instantly making the podcast out of date. So you can thank me later if it all works out. The other thing is I've been increasingly angry at Thomas Frank for his, tactics and performances. I find his football cowardly. He doesn't. Okay. In the first half of his time of Spurs so far, we were quite a cautious defensive team. And a bit like Nuno, I feel like he was pushed into playing a style of football that he isn't fully comfortable with, which is to become more attacking. He must have either be responding to the players, or I doubt the fans, or the boardroom to play, quote unquote, the Tottenham way. And we've loosened up a little bit and moved forward. But because we spent so long in pre-season and the first half of the season setting up to be a more reactive team, not quite counter-attacking, but trying to be more defensively stable, the shift to being more proactive, getting the ball on the ground, trying to link up and take the game to the opposition, was that much harder. The prep work wasn't there. His view of football and life at Spurs was so antithetical to the actual DNA of the club. And you can talk about whether that's true or not. That's my bias. That's what this podcast is about today. That it was a bad fit from the start. Never quite felt comfortable with him. So I do look back on my time covering Thomas Frank, and I'm aware that I'm going to listen to and probably pay more attention and maybe feel more when I hear somebody reflect back to me something I already feel. That's going to fit into my worldview, that's going to fit into my experiences, and that's going to end up on this podcast and straight into your brain. So again, this is an example of the biases in play. On the flip side of things, the people who are giving him time, or are saying that we need stability, I'm perhaps not giving as much credence to that opinion as perhaps I should, because those are really important people in the Spurs fan base, and it is still happening. I don't agree with them. I think they're wrong to want stability for the sake of stability. To stick with Frank because it didn't work out before by chopping and changing. Like, you've got to wait for the right coach. So my increasing anger at Thomas Frank, the frustration I feel personally running a supporters club that hosts regular watch parties and seeing our numbers decline week after week, people who were regulars last season that now just are telling me they're not engaging with the club the same way. They're not watching games. They just can't. They just look for the highlights and see that we've lost and either watch or don't. I mean, it's crazy. It's awful. It's killing the enjoyment of the fan base. There are young kids who, on the back of that Europa League win, might have had some energy into becoming Spurs fans, who now might look at it and say, well, what's the point? It saddens me, and I attribute a lot of that on the appointment of Thomas Frank and his approach to managing us this year. I don't like it. What Spurs is a team that shouldn't. I'm just trying to get back to the Tottenham way narrative that's come up a lot this year as the switch from Ange to Frank has happened. In many ways, I'm a simple, stereotypical Spurs fan. I'm happiest when we're winning, of course, and doing so with flair and guile. Less so when we grind it out. Less so when we lose because we're a glass cannon. And even less so when we're not fun and we still lose, which is where I think we are now. The ultimate goal seems to be trying to grind things out. Like, you can sense the team playing at halftime for the 0-0 rather than going for it. getting a draw and trying to hold on to something. We're playing like relegation fodder. I don't want that. For me, Spurs as a team has the capacity to be aggressive and intentional with their on-the-ball moments, which, again, they should have the capacity to maximize within the game. Maybe not right now as much, because I feel like once there's weakness, other teams don't fear you and don't maybe give you the respect on the ball to be aggressive as you'd like. The fear that the Pochettino team had. Rocking up every week, you thought you'd win, and the other team knew that. Right now, we have the sunken shoulders and misery of a relegation team, and other Premier League teams are very good and very aggressive too. It all comes down to the game is about glory quotes. The destination to the silverware is what counts. I'm not in the camp of do anything you can and sacrifice to win. And if we are, it's got to pay off. Like in the Europa League last season, that was lucky, because I feel like if we'd bombed out in the quarterfinals, people would have been furious. It's just not me, and I have difficulty entering the headspace of Spurs fans who do think like that. Somebody who does think that we should chop and change how we play. That to me feels like something that Chelsea would do. You just have good players and just switch up the style completely from manager to manager to maximize trophies for the sake of trophies. They have the money historically to do that. Arsenal, on the other hand, I feel like have a much higher acceptance of defensive football like we see now with Arteta, because they were incredibly defensively solid in my youth, both under George Graham, tremendously successful. That was the foundation of Arsene Wenger's successful Arsenal team. They were defensive rocks with flair players laid up on top. Liverpool and Manchester United, I think, are a lot more like Spurs. And the fans, I remember hearing Jack Hussey to Trunk was on, it was a Liverpool fans podcast, and he was asked about the Tottenham way, and Jack reflected it back and mentioned that Liverpool having a similar play style, and the guy said, no, I don't think so. But I echo what Jack says, is that I don't think that Liverpool fan would necessarily accept being coached like Mourinho's Chelsea or Mourinho's Tottenham. They still do expect to have exciting players who are front-footed and technically capable. Same for Manchester United fans. So yeah, all of this makes it more difficult for me to communicate the views of Spurs fans who maybe are much more willing to sack it off and just play however we need to do to get some points on the board, even when we're not, in a relegation battle. I think right now we're going to have to do that. I think we're at a point where we're going to have to grind out wins. But in an ideal situation, I'm not of that mindset that we need to rip up the to dare to do philosophy. I think that we should be able to make it work, because that's what makes football exciting and fun, is there being different clubs with different personalities. Otherwise, we're all just the same team with slightly different players and slightly different shirt colours. And so the other thing is that I might under and over report these opinions. Like I either downplay them or they stand out to me. The person who thinks that Spurs should do whatever to win all the time, even if it's, setting up with 10 men behind the ball and hoping that you nick a goal on the break against, Fulham. That will stand out to me as a unicorn that I'll write down, versus, I don't necessarily communicate as well the bulk of sentiment on a particular topic. And what I consider to be the default Spurs perspective on club values. The other thing about Thomas Frank that I've really disliked is how he communicates. And I know this has been a bit of a bugbear for some who dislike it tremendously. The way that he talks down the team, the way that he doesn't... He hangs on the fact that we finished 17th last year. The statement in his first press conference that we're going to lose games, that we don't deserve to be in the Champions League. I know that there's wider context around these statements, and some people are hanging on to that and saying that that's super important, but he's still saying these other bits too. And that's what gets cropped up and put out on social media. It doesn't feel like the club are necessarily supporting him behind the scenes in that regard. Yes, we are struggling. Yes, we are 17th. But it does feel like he throws the players underneath the bus. I think he said after the West Ham game that we need the strikers to score more goals. And it's like, well, if only you had a way to influence that, Frank, I think about how people use their words a lot as part of this podcast, and I do think his oratory skills leave a lot to be desired. Poch, Mourinho, Conte weren't perfect, but you could tell through the way that they talked about us that, Poch had a lot of affection for Spurs. It's been covered tremendously and is probably what's carrying this wave of support to bring him back to the club. Mourinho and Conte knew that we were a club with ambition and history. I think Frank sometimes says these things, but I don't necessarily believe him within the full context of his words. I think one of the key messages of a leader is to communicate a positive and hopeful outlook for your team, whether you're working in government, whether you're working in, I don't know, working in a grocery store or leading a football team. It's not necessarily about being a happy clapper, but you have to lift everybody up from within the players, from within the fans. You can't just turn around and tell us that we're disloyal because we don't like losing games playing shit football. We matter too. And that's why I think the fans have turned on him so aggressively. He's trying to manipulate the fans in a way of which, I think that people don't enjoy, which is being told that they're not true believers. We've been here a lot longer than him. We will be here a lot longer than with him. When Ange said he was going to win something in his second season at this club, deserved to win trophies, I believed him. I knew it. I knew deep down I could feel it. And that's what carried me through the last stages of last season, even though back in January, I thought, we got to get this guy gone. Even with the injuries, I don't like this. This isn't going well. But I was wrong. Maybe I could be wrong about Frank, but I was wrong about Ange. He delivered us a trophy. I don't even think that Thomas Frank can motivate the fan base as a whole. You might be super special and feel motivated by his words, but as a whole, I don't think he even can convince me that we could finish in the top half of the Premier League this season. And I think that's a big problem. I mean, he's at the point with some people where anything he does makes people angry because the performances and the results have been so bad. People are complaining about the way he chews gum, or his hair, or his face, or his big ears, or his use of an iPad, or read on a tactics board. Again, since I wrote this, he fucking pictured holding an Arsenal cup at Bournemouth. Like, everything he does pisses people off. I mean, hell, even I will admit to being a little annoyed when he embraced that young Brentford fan a few games ago. Like, there was just something deep down in me that was like, dude, this looks terrible. Like, could you not find a way to embrace this kid? Not after like a piss poor 0-0 draw. Like, I feel so petty for it, but it's kind of where I'm at, and it's also why I haven't wanted to get behind the microphone and filter other people's views, because I feel that petty and aggrieved by Thomas Frank. It's crazy. I'm annoyed by it. I'm annoyed at myself. I hate it. Our manager should hold our club in high enough esteem that he treats us with respect. But it tackles a deep down worry of mine, or annoyance of mine rather, that we're a banter club, that we get mugged off by 24 drunk Grimsby supporters dressed as minions watching the darts. It's like it's fucking insane. We should have killed off Spursy this summer after the Europa League, but the club let us down. Thomas Frank is letting us down, and I'm so annoyed. And so I'm not an objective observer on him. I felt even last season, like with Ange, I kind of wanted him gone, but I could kind of see something happening. I could take a step back and say, well, yeah, I can see why people want him to stay, and yeah, I can see why he should go. On this, I can't wrap my head around the logic in keeping him. beyond this season. Maybe he gets. This is me spitballing. I think he survives this week. I think he gets through to the Champions League knockout stages. He gets those, and then he's gone. But I don't see how you bring in quality enough players to push us up the table in January with this project, or by sacking him with no project. I'm actually surprised that we got Conor Gallagher in, quite frankly. Good player, he's fine. Got nothing to say on it. I'll probably do a transfer roundup in early February. But yeah, I think that's how long he's got. It's way too early to bring in an interim. We're not going to get Xabi Alonso. Poch isn't going to come back early. We're kind of stuck with him for a bit. But yeah, overall, I'm a petty bitch, and so are many other podcasters, as you probably know. And this affects how I think about Thomas Frank when I'm researching and scripting a pod. I tune out the stuff I've heard multiple times. I miss the nuance sometimes. On the 10th, version of somebody putting Thomas Frank on blast for his latest press conference or whatever, rocking up with a Chelsea hat or something. And I'll amplify sometimes the one unique voice and give it equal value to more common views. It's just hard to balance. I don't know. I kind of want him gone now, but the same part of me just thinks, what's the point? Like, as long as he doesn't get us relegated. I mean, in terms of, looking back more, 20,000 foot view of Tottenham are the things that I won't cover on this podcast. I don't like covering speculative stuff like transfer rumors or what other podcasters believe are areas we need to target in the transfer window. Like, yes, we need a left back. Yes, we need a centre back. Yes, we need a centre midfielder. Like, that's fine. You can go to those and you'll get a better opinion of or better grasp on what that opinion is. But I find it to be, to a certain extent, the sports equivalent of fan fiction. Like, wouldn't it be great if Spurs went out and got this manager from the lower edge, lower leagues in Holland because he's amazing, or this player from South America who you've never heard of, like, who's going to be a superstar. Like, sure, that might be true, but there's no evidence for it. It's not even a possibility. You're just going to set yourself up to be disappointed when it doesn't happen. Oh, sorry. I appreciate the knowledge and the skill of the scouting done by some of the more popular Spurs podcasters in this area, and I think it's a valuable educational tool, but it's not for me in the same way as it used to be. I did used to enjoy Nathan Clark's scouting videos on the Extra Inch Patreon that I used to subscribe to. I used to like learning from him about how to watch a game, but until the player is holding up a shirt, it just feels like it's setting me up for disappointment, so I won't cover that on here. Yeah, I mean, maybe a Spurs podcast that's dedicated to talking about anything other than Spurs could be a fun and informative way to cover this type of topic of looking outwards at other leagues and other players, other teams, through the lens as a Spurs fan. I guess that's kind of what football between the lines is. So yeah, I'm also worried about whether we're sleepwalking into a relegation fight. This has been something that's shared by Jack on Rule the Roost. The data, the vibes, the organisation all points to a big club in serious trouble. We've seen it with Leeds, Aston Villa, Everton hanging around there. Grand old clubs who've won things of significance, but the poor management, the bad recruitment, the inability to fight inertia has all contributed to periods of serious peril for these teams. The financial and sporting muscle of Spurs means we should never be flirting with sustained periods in the bottom quarter of the Premier League, but here we are. And this brings me on to leadership. Vinay Venkatesham has been Spurs CEO for about 9 months, and in that time we won a trophy, and the interactions with the fans has been better, the support for the women's team has been better, but there's also been some serious missteps. It's difficult to distinguish between him and Daniel Levy's period at the club. Paratici coming in after his ban was just weird and gross. I still feel strange about it. And the fact that he's going to leave at the end of this transfer window is even stranger. He's been back for like 6 months. What kind of sporting direction is that? There was numerous weird situations in the summer transfer window. We've sold our top scorer from last season. We've appointed a coach whose values are in opposition to those stated by the club. You know, we have Tadeiros to do everywhere at the ground. Like, how is what we're doing now daring or doing? I find him to have strange obsessions with stability for the sake of stability's sake, based upon getting lucky with Mikel Arteta. It makes me question his judgment. I guess, you know, the higher profile side of the club, the men's team, is seemingly worse than when Daniel Levy was in charge, and maybe now we know why he was such a micromanager. Perhaps he was holding together the club a lot more than we realised, and perhaps the Lewis's should have had a much more gradual off-ramp than what we saw with him getting sacked last summer. And of course, we can't talk about leadership without considering the ownership of Spurs. We know that the Lewises have more money than God, and I'm not expecting them to put 500 million down on the table to get Mbappe. But there has been a failure to effectively run a modern football club, and change has been seemingly stimulated within the last 18 months by a consultancy audit of the club. And it just beggars belief that our top 6 rivals were able to move to this point so quickly and operate so differently before us. I'm getting to the point where I'll welcome 99% of new owners, whoever they are, wherever they come from. And I'm tying myself in knots to justify a different approach that would be consistent with the sporting ideals and history of our great club. There are things that I can do personally to keep engaging with the fan base and keep enjoying the players on the pitch without supporting financially or going to games, which is admittedly easy for somebody far away. I can stay involved with my supporters club but not necessarily chair it. There are things I could do. But the fact that I'm at this point really irks me. It really makes me feel slightly ashamed that I'm willing to maybe throw some of my values away for the sake of just a more fun time watching Spurs. Like, we should have been in a position to have sustained growth and be a top 10 team at least, at worst. Not this shower of shit. And then moving on, again, this is opinions of mine on the fans. I love you lot, but you drive me crazy. I've got that in big, bold letters here. I've got a higher tolerance than most for arguing, bickering, and just general terrible opinions. Otherwise this podcast wouldn't exist. But we're a fan base at a breaking point. And I'm surprised there hasn't been reports of fighting in the stands and stuff like that, like between fans. I know it's been directed at the players, but it's really quite antagonistic online, at least. Maybe it's all a bunch of keyboard warriors. And we're getting desperate. And that's coming across in the podcasts and stuff that I see online. And I filter out the fringe, weird, like ludicrous opinions sometimes. Harry Redknapp or Ryan Mason coming in as caretaker manager. I would even say Robbie Keane coming in for 6 months. There's no noise around it. He's at a club doing well. But is that the point we're at? Getting Robbie Keane? I mean, Jesus Christ. I tend to downplay the spend some money crowd. But this might be an important facet of the overall landscape. I just don't know. But it's unclear what is sometimes somebody's rogue opinion about the team, the Lewises, interpretation of tactics, versus something which is a more understated and widespread belief. And it's a challenge that I'm still yet to kind of fully overcome. So, I mean, there's also just the podcast that I listen to, I think, is what I'm going to wrap up with. I'm a man of a certain age. I'm a nearly 40-year-old bloke. I grew up in England, and there are certain podcasters that I gravitate towards because I feel have been in a sort of similar mindset to me over many years, make references that I understand, have a self-deprecation or jokiness that I also identify with and kind of enjoy. You've heard me talk about a few of them a lot, I enjoy those types of podcasts, but there's also been the people who've been like super helpful to me, right? So you've got, I've got affection for people like Flav on the Fighting Cock because he came on and interviewed on this podcast. Mike Lee, Barnaby Slater, Gareth Dace, like these are all people who've been wonderful to me and helped me grow this show. Have given me their time. I value that a lot. People who I interact with on Blue Sky, the guys on Yaps. I'm now a member of the CADS Facebook forum, and so I've been on that podcast too. I've been on Tottenham Home and Away. I'm going to be on a few other podcasts this year. These are things which are going to affect my ability to fully critique and share opinions on those podcasts. All of them are big boys. They're all capable of taking a little bit of criticism, but still, that must factor into my thinking, and I'm more likely to listen to them than something else. So that takes up time away from other podcasts that I could be listening to and sharing their opinions from. There's also the podcast that I've just been listening to for years, right? So before I even started this show, I was a regular listener to the Tottenham Depot, the Gamers About Glory, the Fighting Cock, Filthy Shambles. The Rule the Roost I've been listening to since pretty much the start, the Extra Inch. I wasn't listening to the Spurs show as much. Last Word on Spurs, it's just too long for me. The YouTube crowd, I've talked about them before. I try to give them as much coverage as I can, and there are a few that I talk about semi-regularly on this show, like the Spurs 5. But it's kind of a blind spot within what I'm listening to and what I'm sharing with you guys. But that's where I'm at. Those are the biases I have, and there are podcasts that I don't enjoy. I won't share them, but there are a few. There are some that I hate listening to, but there are a couple that I won't listen to at all. And I won't share them here because I'm not about airing that dirty laundry on a podcast, even if I have a couple dozen listeners and a dog. It's just the way it is. There are hundreds of Spurs podcasts. I mean, fuck me. Since the start of the year, I think I've counted up half a dozen new Spurs pods that I've either discovered, or have recently started up. It's crazy. There's a lot of voices out there, and there's a lot of biases floating around. So I hope that me being honest about where I come from helps you appreciate what I'm sharing with you on here. Helps you be critical of me, helps you be critical of others. I hope it makes sense, Like I said, I scripted this the night after the Bournemouth game, and I was tired and pissed off. I've slept better since then, but I'm still pissed off. I just wanted to lay down some thoughts, do a bit of grievance airing, to copy a awful phrase, but I want my Tottenham back. I want to have fun with my mates. I want to listen to consistently happy podcasts that I can share with you. I want to annoy the kids at my daughter's school who are walking around in Saka jerseys. I want to stick two fingers up at them. I want to be like, we beat you in the North London derby. I want that. And the worst part is I know that we're capable of it, but we just can't seem to put it together. So yeah, I've got a paragraph here. Let's see if this makes the edit. But this might be my worst and most inaccurate take. But I believe that reality is in a way how you perceive it. It's not that there aren't things that are true or not, but everybody experiences events differently. That's what this podcast tries to capture. It'll continue to be flawed, and I'll do my best, and I'm aware of my blind spots and my preferences. But you should be mindful of them too when you listen to me or any podcast. So, let's finish up with some housekeeping. You can follow this show on Blue Sky at Podnam Podspur. You can follow me at ian.coys.social. You can email the show, podnampodspur@gmail.com. go out and check out some of the stuff I've been putting out last year. I'll hope to get some more things in front of you soon. Going to be appearing on some podcasts in the near future. I'm lining up some interesting interviews. Like I said, I'll do a transfer roundup soon, and I hope to get back into a more regular habit of recording these. It's funny how you take a few weeks off and there's a rhythm to recording podcasts. It is much easier to get behind the microphone and suppress the sort of awareness and embarrassment that you have of talking into a microphone. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you got something out of it. Again, I'll probably record at some point another podcast about this podcast upon in reflection. And this felt cathartic. I enjoyed it. Thank you for listening. As I say every week, keep listening to Spurs Card podcasts, keep making Spurs podcasts, and up the Spurs.